Our emotions are not just fleeting feelings. They are deeply ingrained patterns, memorized states that have been wired into our brains through repeated experiences. Every time we react with anger, frustration, or resentment, we are not making a conscious choice. We are simply running an old program that has been reinforced over time. When we understand that emotions are nothing more than biochemical records of the past, we begin to see that our reactions are not truly ours. They are rehearsed, conditioned responses that have been imprinted into our nervous system, often without our awareness. Think about the last time someone irritated you. Maybe it was something they said, or perhaps they disregarded your feelings. In that moment, your body automatically responded with a rush of emotions. Your heart rate increased, your muscles tensed, and your mind started racing with thoughts of judgment, anger, or self-defense. But was that response truly a choice? Or was it simply a program that had been activated, an automatic sequence running in your subconscious mind? The truth is, most of us have been living on autopilot when it comes to our emotions. We have practiced feeling a certain way so many times that it has become second nature. If we were conditioned in childhood to feel unworthy or rejected, then our body has memorized that state. If we have spent years reacting with frustration in traffic, then our nervous system fires off that reaction as soon as we find ourselves in similar conditions. Over time, these reactions become our identity. We don't just feel anger, we become angry people. We don't just feel stress, we identify as stressed individuals. And because the body and mind are so interconnected, our emotions begin to dictate our reality. Neuroscience tells us that when we repeatedly experience the same emotional reactions, we strengthen the neural pathways associated with those emotions. The more we react with anger, the stronger the neural circuits for anger become. The more we feel victimized, the easier it becomes to trigger that state. This is why it can feel so difficult to change. It's not just a matter of willpower. It's about breaking the addiction to familiar emotional states. Every emotion we feel releases a chemical cocktail in the body. When we experience joy, our body floods with dopamine and serotonin, creating a sense of well-being. When we feel anger, our body releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, preparing us for fight or flight. These chemicals influence our physiology, changing our heart rate, blood pressure, and even our immune function. The problem is, when we repeatedly trigger negative emotions, our body becomes addicted to those chemicals. We start craving the very emotions that cause us suffering because they have become our baseline. The subconscious mind, which controls 95% of our daily thoughts, actions, and emotions, does not distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. This is why just thinking about a past argument or injustice can trigger the same physiological response as if it were happening again. The body doesn't know the difference. It simply follows the neural pathways it has been trained to follow. If we continue to dwell on negative emotions, we keep the body in a state of stress. And over time, that stress manifests as chronic anxiety, depression, or even disease. To break free from these memorized emotional states, we must first become aware of them. Awareness is the first step to change. When we start observing our reactions instead of blindly acting on them, we begin to detach from the emotional patterns that have controlled us. We must learn to recognize our triggers and understand that they are not personal. They are simply patterns that have been reinforced over time. If we want to rewire our brain and free ourselves from emotional reactivity, we must consciously practice new emotional states. Just as we have trained ourselves to feel anger or frustration, we can train ourselves to feel gratitude, joy, and peace. When we make a conscious effort to shift our focus, to interrupt the old patterns, we begin to weaken the neural pathways of the past and create new ones. This is not about suppressing emotions or pretending that we don't feel them. It's about understanding that emotions are signals, but they are not who we are. The moment we stop identifying with our reactions, we take back control. When we realize that we are not obligated to feel the same way we always have, we open the door to true emotional freedom. We tend to believe that our thoughts define us, that the voice in our head narrating our experiences is who we are. But this is one of the greatest illusions of the mind. The truth is, we are not our thoughts. We are merely the observer of them. Our thoughts are nothing more than patterns of electrical activity in the brain, firing based on past experiences, conditioning, and subconscious programming. They are not absolute truths, nor do they always serve our best interests. Yet, most people go through life completely identified with their thoughts, allowing them to dictate their emotions, decisions, and behaviors without ever questioning their validity. Consider how often negative or reactive thoughts arise throughout the day. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and immediately a flood of thoughts rushes in. Judgment, irritation, maybe even anger. You don't consciously choose these thoughts. They appear automatically, triggered by the situation. But where do they come from? They emerge from past conditioning, from patterns wired into the brain over time. If in the past you frequently responded to frustration with anger, your brain has memorized that response and now reproduces it automatically whenever a similar situation arises. It's not you choosing to feel angry, it's your conditioning taking over. The human brain is designed to be efficient. It relies on habits and automated responses to conserve energy. This is why the vast majority of our thoughts, research suggests up to 95%, are repetitive. We wake up and think the same thoughts as the day before. We worry about the same things, react in the same ways, and replay the same emotional loops, all without realizing that we are simply running an old program. The problem with this is that if our thoughts remain unchanged, our emotional state remains unchanged, and so does our reality. Every thought we think creates a biochemical reaction in the body. When we entertain a stressful or fearful thought, our brain signals the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. The body then responds with a faster heart rate, shallow breathing, and muscle tension, reinforcing the emotional state of stress. Over time, if we keep thinking the same thoughts, the body memorizes these reactions and they become habitual. Eventually, we don't even need an external trigger. Our body starts generating these emotions on its own. This is how people become trapped in chronic anxiety, frustration, or sadness. Their thoughts create emotions, their emotions reinforce their thoughts, and the cycle repeats. Breaking free from this cycle begins with the realization that thoughts are not facts. Just because a thought appears in the mind does not mean it is true, nor does it mean we have to engage with it. The moment we start observing our thoughts instead of blindly believing them, we create a gap between ourselves and the mind's automatic patterns. We step out of the program and into the role of the conscious observer. Mindfulness research has shown that the simple act of observing thoughts without attachment changes brain activity. When we witness our thoughts from a place of detachment, the neural pathways associated with those thoughts begin to weaken. This is because we are no longer reinforcing them with our attention and emotional energy. Instead of reacting impulsively to a thought, we can pause, recognize it as just a passing mental event, and choose a different response. This ability to observe rather than react is what separates those who are controlled by their thoughts from those who master their own mind. Many of the thoughts we experience daily are not even ours to begin with. They are inherited from childhood, absorbed from societal conditioning, or influenced by the media we consume. If we were raised in an environment where anger was a common response to problems, then anger-based thoughts will arise naturally in our mind. If we have spent years consuming negativity through social media, then our thoughts will be colored by that negativity. The mind is like a sponge, absorbing whatever it is exposed to and then regurgitating it back to us as if it were our own voice. This is why it is crucial to be mindful of what we consume mentally and emotionally. If we fill our minds with empowering, uplifting information, we train our brain to generate thoughts that align with those higher states of being. One of the most effective ways to break the habit of identifying with thoughts is through meditation. Meditation teaches us to observe the mind without attachment attachment, to watch thoughts come and go like clouds passing in the sky. The more we practice this, the more we realize that thoughts have no power unless we give them power. They are like radio signals constantly broadcasting, but we have the ability to tune into different frequencies. We can choose which thoughts to engage with and which to let pass unnoticed. Understanding that we are not our thoughts is the key to emotional freedom. It allows us to step back from the automatic reactions that have shaped our behavior for years and instead respond to life with awareness and intention. When we stop identifying with every thought that crosses our mind, we stop being controlled by them. We gain the ability to create new patterns of thinking, to rewire our brain, and to shift our emotional state at will. The human brain is an incredible organ, constantly adapting and evolving based on our experiences, thoughts, and emotions. This ability to change and rewire itself is known as neuroplasticity. For most of our lives, we have been conditioned to believe that our emotions and reactions are fixed, that we are simply the way we are. But science has proven that the brain is not static. It is flexible and capable of creating new neural pathways at any age. This means that no matter how long we have been reacting with anger, frustration, or stress, we have the power to change. We can rewire our brain to respond differently, to feel differently, and ultimately to be different. Every time we experience an emotion, a specific network of neurons in the brain fires together. If we repeatedly react with frustration in certain situations, those neural circuits become stronger and more automatic. The brain follows the principle of neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that the more we repeat a thought or emotion, the more deeply ingrained it becomes. Over time, these habitual patterns become our default responses, shaping our personality and the way we experience life. This is why some people always seem to be angry, while others seem naturally calm. It is not a matter of personality, but of practice. The good news is that just as the brain can wire itself into negative emotional patterns, it can also rewire itself for positive, empowering states. If we want to break free from anger, stress, or frustration, we must intentionally train our brain to respond differently. This process begins with awareness. The moment we recognize our habitual emotional reactions, we create a gap between ourselves and the automatic program running in our subconscious mind. Instead of immediately reacting with anger, we can pause, take a breath, and choose a different response. The more we practice this, the weaker the old neural pathways become, and the easier it is to form new, healthier ones. One of the most effective ways to rewire the brain is through visualization. Neuroscience has shown that when we imagine ourselves responding to a situation in a new way, the brain activates the same neural circuits as if we were actually experiencing it. This means that by mentally rehearsing a calm and composed reaction to a trigger, we are training our brain to make that response more automatic. If we spend just a few minutes each day visualizing ourselves remaining unbothered in challenging situations, our brain begins to rewire itself to make that response a reality. Another powerful tool for rewiring the brain is mindfulness. When we practice mindfulness, we bring our attention to the present moment and observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment. This helps us break free from the habitual patterns of reactivity that have been programmed into our brain. Instead of being consumed by anger or frustration, we learn to step back and witness those emotions as temporary sensations passing through us. Over time, this practice strengthens the neural circuits associated with emotional regulation, making it easier to remain calm and composed in real-life situations. Gratitude is another key component of rewiring the brain. When we focus on gratitude, we activate the brain's reward system, releasing neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that promote feelings of well-being. The more we practice gratitude, the more our brain rewires itself yourself to look for positive experiences instead of negative ones. This shift in focus reduces the likelihood of being triggered by others because we are no longer operating from a place of lack or dissatisfaction. Instead, we train our brain to see the good, even in situations that would have previously frustrated us. Breathing techniques also play a crucial role in rewiring the brain's response to stress and anger. When we are triggered, our body automatically shifts into a fight or flight state, releasing stress hormones that heighten emotional reactions. By practicing deep conscious breathing, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, signaling to the brain that we are safe. Over time, this trains the nervous system to respond to stress with calmness instead of reactivity. Consistency is key in the process of rewiring the brain. Just as it takes time to build a muscle, it takes time to weaken old neural pathways and strengthen new ones. Every time we consciously choose a different response, whether it's taking a deep breath, shifting our focus to gratitude, or practicing mindfulness, we are reinforcing the new neural connections that support emotional resilience. Eventually, these new patterns become our default responses, and what once triggered anger or frustration no longer has power over us. The ability to rewire the brain means that no one is stuck with the emotional patterns they have been living with. Regardless of past conditioning, anyone can train their brain to respond with peace, clarity, and emotional freedom. The human brain is naturally wired for survival. This means that for most of our lives, we operate in a state of reactivity, constantly assessing threats, judging situations, and responding to stimuli based on past experiences. When we are in this survival mode, our nervous system is in a heightened state of alertness, and our emotional responses are driven by fear, stress, and the need to protect ourselves. This is why so many people find themselves reacting with anger, frustration, or irritation when confronted with challenges or difficult individuals. Their brain has been conditioned to see threats everywhere, and they respond accordingly. Living in survival mode means being stuck in an automatic cycle of reaction. When someone says something offensive or dismissive, the body instantly triggers a stress response. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, and the brain releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This reaction happens so fast that most people don't even realize they are caught in an old pattern. The moment they feel threatened, they react without thinking, reinforcing the neural pathways that keep them trapped in emotional reactivity. This cycle repeats over and over until a person becomes defined by their reactions, believing that anger, frustration, and stress are simply a part of who they are. What most people don't realize is that there is another way to operate, a way that frees them from these automatic reactions and allows them to consciously create their emotional state. Instead of living in survival mode, they can shift into creation mode. In this state, the brain no longer perceives everything as a threat. Instead of reacting to situations out of habit, a person in creation mode responds with intention. They no longer give their power away to external circumstances because they have learned to generate their own internal state, independent of what is happening around them. Shifting from survival to creation mode begins with awareness. The moment we become aware of our emotional triggers, we stop being controlled by them. Instead of immediately reacting when someone does something that would normally upset us, we pause and observe our internal response. This simple act of noticing interrupts the automatic cycle and gives us the opportunity to choose a different reaction. By doing this repeatedly, we begin to break the conditioned patterns that have kept us trapped in reactivity. One of the most effective ways to enter creation mode is to take control of our focus. The mind is constantly scanning for information, and what we focus on determines our emotional state. In survival mode, the brain fixates on potential threats. What could go wrong? Who might upset us? What problems might arise? This negative focus keeps us locked in a cycle of stress and reactivity. But when we shift our focus to what we want to create, how we want to feel, how we want to respond, what kind of person we want to be, we begin to rewire the brain for a different way of living. When we consciously choose to focus on gratitude, calmness, and inner peace, we activate different neural pathways in the brain. Instead of reinforcing stress and anger, we reinforce emotional stability and resilience. Over time, these new patterns become our default way of being. The more we practice generating positive emotional states from within, the less dependent we become on external circumstances to determine how we feel. Breathing techniques are a powerful tool for shifting out of survival mode and into creation mode. When we are stressed or triggered, our breathing becomes shallow and rapid, signaling to the brain that we are in danger. But by taking slow, deep breaths, we send a different signal to the nervous system, telling it that we are safe. This simple practice helps us regain control over our emotional state and prevents us from slipping into automatic reactions. Visualization is another method for rewiring the brain to operate from a place of creation rather than survival. When we repeatedly imagine ourselves responding to challenging situations with calmness and clarity, we train our brain to make that response automatic. The more vividly we rehearse these positive reactions in our mind, the stronger the neural connections for emotional regulation become. Over time, what once triggered an immediate reaction of anger or frustration no longer affects us in the same way. Meditation is one of the most effective practices for making the shift from survival to creation mode. By sitting in stillness and observing our thoughts without attachment, we learn to detach from the constant stream of reactivity that governs most people's lives. Meditation helps us become aware of the space between stimulus and response, allowing us to choose how we want to feel instead of being at the mercy of our conditioning. The more we practice this, the easier it becomes to maintain emotional balance, even in the face of difficult situations. This shift is not about suppressing emotions or ignoring challenges. It is about training the brain to respond with intention rather than habit. It is about moving from a place of reaction to a place of creation, where we take full responsibility for our emotional state instead of allowing external factors to dictate how we feel. The moment we realize that we have the power to generate our own internal state, we become free from the cycle of emotional reactivity that has controlled us for so long.